So hello there. Oops, I'll put this here, the mic. Centering into my belly for a second. Gentle breath in. Loosening sacrum, hips, genitals, root. Feeling breath expand to thighs and hamstrings. Knees, back of the knees, calves, shins, ankle, heel, arch. Whew, relaxing the arch really does something. Toes, ball of foot. I don't know what you call the top part of the foot, but top of the foot. Hear like the Erykah Badu song, what a day, what a day. What a week it's been. Whew. So, tea with Tata is quickly turning into whiskey with Tata. So, yeah. So, what are my starting thoughts today? If folks know, I've started what I've called the tea room. I'm the tea master, and we're there to spill tea. So that's a online community space on Mighty Networks that is just very really loving how messy it is already. It's only been a few days, and it's just it's like the energy that, there's no rules, but there's a culture, and also like not being policed in a sense on like larger social media kind of outlets. There's always a sense of like surveillance possibly happening, and even though like I guess that can happen here, like there's just something like more bought in, more easy, and more interesting things going on. So that's been really cool. And something that's been happening, there's been a lot more talk about Eros and like sex magic in this space. And this led me down to a kind of rabbit hole that I shared on the Mighty Networks. But I was watching this really kind of, I'd say, pretty god awful video about sex magic that I think was on Vice, and it's not not the one with Luna. It's with another person, and I was just like, oh, I don't know, man. But this book came up called the Magdalen Manuscript, The Alchemies of Horus and the Sex Magic of Isis, by Tom Kenyon and Judy Sion. And it's a super new age text, and I've been pretty interested in the person Jesus and Mary Magdalene as these kind of like, I think this is pretty typical, but like interested in them as this kind of alchemical pairing of sex musicians, and who is a teacher and who is a student. It's kind of blurry. And I always been interested in Mary Magdalene for a number of reasons, and that's one of them. And also, the history of Christianity as this kind of danced, ecstatic kind of religion that takes after the what in this book called Dancing in the Streets, by Barbara Ehrenreich. Really recommended book, awesome book. She talks about how Jesus' cult took after the cults of Dionysus, which was kind of like a dancing cult. So that's where there's all this like feasting and eating and wine and stuff, and it's very sensual and it's a very erotic cult. And how one of the things I tracked around that is like, so when the Mary Magdalene gets kind of written out of or edited out of the Bible, also goes the sensual quality of Christianity, and that includes dance. And of course, as a dancer, that's a really profoundly interesting part to me. I was like, oh, like the origins of whiteness and white imperial Christianity. And then, Barbara talks about pews being put into church so that now you're sitting and the religion is being projected at you, which before, though, if it was a circle religion or circular danced religion, that means you have like a circle and then somebody goes in and dances in the middle and then you come out, or there's like a ring dance, right? Very, very different type of transmission of knowledge then, right? One is that you might even say Jesus was probably maybe a great dancer in this circle, and so was Mary, and maybe they did salsa together or contact improv or something like that. Maybe they battled, street dancer. I was like, Dad, that's super fucking cool, right? So I've always been really interested in Mary Magdalene as a character, and like scholarship is, it's like kind of internet blogs and whatever. But I think it's interesting. There's also a book called Tantric Jesus that I've read that I find pretty interesting. It's about esoteric practices that have to of the body, not to do with Jesus. I forgot the author, so that's like a reference point. But anyways, so the Mayor Magdalene has been very interesting to me, and also just me realizing that while I'm doing this horror work and do this work that's intended, I guess, really around sensuality and eros, without really having me really dived into that. I've felt for a long time, because of my body being a man, it kind of like had this fear of really speaking about those things, and realizing more and more, actually, it creates a distortion to not talk about those things or not accept those things in my practice, and then that can create some weird dynamics around activation that people experience sometimes. um Primarily, like, maybe even like people, when they're doing this hara breathing thing that I always teach, which is the breath into the belly, they don't know what to do with the erotic sensations come up. And um me having not created intentional space for people to experience that without that being exploited or become a reason for oppression, that's something I've lacked on. So there's a sincere apology I'd like to put out to the network right now as a kind of a prayer as well, around that. I'm going to just hold that in myself for a second. Yeah, apologies for not having um, fulfilled the lineage of this hara work, this belly work, this lineage of sex work and birth work and my moon work and my lack of knowledge around that. And I apologize. A lot of that's my frozenness around being a man and the violence that's associated with me. So it's only now that I've really taken the time. And at the same, and I haven't been worshiping at the temple of the goddess, which I feel is something really I have to change, So that's a little bit what I've been doing over the last few days. And part of the tea room is actually more of me moving into, um, it's still like a phallic kind of way of being, but it also has some other qualities to it other than just projecting from this pedestal. Um, and incidentally, my two tattoos that I have are dancing goddesses. So one is, I don't know if you can see it. Uh, I don't know. It's a Japanese goddess, Uzume no Mikoto. Uh, she is actually so somebody, like, so not somebody, but when the sun goddess went into the cave and during a like a, what do you call it, a solar eclipse, uh, Uzume, who is, I think, represents indigenous Japanese spirituality, like jumped on this tree stump and started doing like kind of a top strip dance, and pulling at her breasts and showing her genitals. And everybody's like, "Oh, this is so funny!" And then like uh, the sun goddess comes out and say, "Oh, what's happening?" And then the sun has returned or something. That was kind of like this kind of sketchy Japanese mythology, but the stripper goddess Uzume goes on to become the template for Miko's like shamanesses, shrine maidens, and well, shamanesses, and then that turns into kind of shrine maidens who are a little bit more subservient to the shrine as a patriarchal structure or imperial shrines as a patriarchal structure. This gets a little bit complicated, but like Maria Kondo is like a shrine maiden. So so if you trail her, she's a Miko. So if you trail Miko back to its roots, it's shaman woman, and the lineage of shaman women often comes through the dancing part comes through Uzume, who is the goddess of dance and art in Japan now. That's kind of how she's held. And the other tattoo I have is of death and I guess a witch, that takes after kind of the dance and macabre genre paintings of Europe. And so this is actually this tattoo of death and the dancing maiden is very much actually kind of inspired by reading Barbara's book, Dancing in the Streets. And yeah, kind of like um, yeah, commemorates, I don't know if it commemorates anything, but it speaks to something. Yeah, and that was my first tattoo. So um in any case, so that all this and all that, um this comes back down to Mary Magdalene, the dancing goddess and sensual goddess, erotic goddess, creature, person. I don't know. I actually, like I said, I'm very interested, but I also don't know a lot because I think there's a lot to know. And I feel like partially being a dude, like I don't get it, it's hard to find the information I really want, so, but I decided to say fuck it the other day and stop censoring my thoughts a little bit. So this weird book called the Magdalen Manuscript jumped out at me, and it's kind of an embarrassing book, written by Tom Kenyon and Judy Sion, and it's supposed to be a channeled conversation between Mary Magdalene, the channeler. So already, like, I'm starting to choke on my own, on my own fluids a bit there, going like, oh, cringe. Oh, okay, what am I getting myself into? But I had this kind of like weird craving to read. I was like, whoa, like I read pretty weird books in general. I definitely don't read things I'm supposed to. If that makes sense. Not that I read really naughty books, but or like just like sources. I'm always interested in like things that are kind of like popular and kind of in bad taste in some ways or something. Like I really love the Jordan Peterson documentary, for example. And some people think I am Jordan Peterson, but I'm really not. But I think there's some interesting things that are happening that he says and also happening around him as a person. When I read, what I like reading is not necessarily things that I'm like, oh, this is the truth in it, but more something that shows us this kind of like cultural alchemical process. And I think, Jordan Peterson's a really interesting character that shows that cultural alchemical process they're going under really actually quite clearly. So I'm quite interested in him as a person. You never know, he might come on to you with Tada, which is be kind of hype. um and also this book had a similar vibe of like, oh, there's some cultural thing that I want to tap into, and like things that are a bit scary, right? Because I'm like, oh, this is like that kind of conspirituality QAnon shit, you know, like, and there was like reference to reptilians in 5D. So I was like, whoa, okay, what am I doing here? But so anyways, I started to read it. What was really cool, let's see, in this, what did I vibe with? It was okay, so this is pretty rad. The delusion of oneness. All beings have their own perspective, which is, this is Mary speaking, right? Which is relative to the dimension they reside in and level of their consciousness. From my experience, it is impossible for any one being to comprehend the totality of existence in all its dimensionality. From my experience and perspective, all beings are interconnected. These interconnections extend in all levels, in all dimensions, and throughout the cosmos. In your planetary existence, you are part of and not separate from your planetary ecosystem. You're intimately connected to all life forms. This is all cool. You breathe because the planet kingdom transformed carbon dioxide into oxygen, a process you call photosynthesis. I prefer to call it Devic transformation. The Devic consciousness of the plant kingdom is vast and intelligent. It is sentient. By its very nature, it transforms one element into the other. It is its nature to transform upon this planet carbon dioxide into oxygen. You know, there's a lot of really interesting stuff here, but you know, and it is this information that gives you life. So you're deeply interconnected to the plant kingdom and all other life forms upon this planet. And actually, just like really sitting here, this like channeling thing, I find really interesting because I'm like, oh, this is kind of like, this is all like, you can read this as like the kind of indigenous animist knowledge, and it's really the same thing, but it has a weird, or not a weird, you know what, I'm going to welcome all things. It has a different impact when it's channeled through a white person, and I wonder if part of that is because um, there's this disconnection to social equality in white culture inherently. So when it's channeling this ancient story, it has like a different effect on you as a transmission. Um, and it seems it has a different quality. And of course, like if, you know, like, yeah, there's a different quality of transmission if this information is coming through an indigenous person or even through maybe another lineage. Like I've definitely in reading Japanese texts about alchemy and this whole thing around photosynthesis and plants and us being plants and the nervous system being modeled after being a plant. And there's a Japanese author, I think it's Takanori Naganuma. He's like a researcher, wrote about, I still can't find the original reference, but I think he wrote about we are all uprooted plants. So we carry the soil within our guts. So the microbiome, the bacteria, that is the soil. We carry the earth within us, which allows the plant within us to be detached from the earth and we can move around. And I was like, whoa, that's a really cool way to put it. But that feels different from what's here, right? It's interesting. The transmission feels different. Because maybe the nervous system quality of white culture and white new age culture is different from other cultures. So anyways, continuing on, you are also interconnected with other intelligences in other dimensions. I am able to communicate with you because we are interconnected. This interconnectedness is a vast ocean. There are channels that you call wormholes connecting parts of the cosmos with distant areas, but this interconnectedness is different from what many people call oneness. So I'm kind of into this actually, because there are so many different ways of using this term. It is not particularly helpful to use this term without being more precise. So let me discuss the truth of oneness as I view it, for it is different from the delusion of oneness. When you reach higher states of consciousness, and I think this is really interesting, the word higher states of consciousness is like a real spell. Like it really pulls you up into your mind and like gets your like brain kind of like, it's like a hypnosis that makes your kind of mind very active and thumpy and like lots of blood flow and like some. It's kind of very pleasurable actually when you hear higher states of consciousness. Maybe that's happening to you right now. Oops, and sorry, that was like a ding from my Mighty Networks kind of notifications. But yeah, when you reach higher states of consciousness in which your experience of time and space are transcended, there are various levels of perception. One of these levels is internet connectedness of all life, all consciousnesses, and all existence. Yeah, cool. When you enter a certain octave of this transcendence to time space, you enter into what Yeshua, which is Jesus, referred to as love. This love is impersonal. It is not romantic in the sense that most people think of it. It is not erotic attraction. It is a resonance that holds all existence in one interrelated vibration, and this vibration is all inclusive. Cool. This state of consciousness is very strange, for when you're in a vibrational state of impersonal love, you can easily hold conflicting opposites together. So this is kind of like the Taoist kind of non-dual stuff that I'm kind of into. I'm like, yeah, non-dual. Yeah. But again, it's really different to hear this through like a channeled white person channeling. The transmission is different. It lands differently for me. And I'm actually going to welcome all things and not judge that, actually. Just say like, that's a different thing. Yeah, and actually even this moment, like saying, you welcome all things feels really good. Rather than this deletion, because I think there is something really kind of beautiful to this white new age dissociative kind of way of channeling and thinking of and perceiving the world. There's something really actually quite beautiful, but you can see that you can't live we can't run our spiritual communities of this being 70 to 80% of the content. If this was like maybe 10 to 20% of what influences us, I think that could be really sweet, actually. So it's almost like there's this too muchness, this kind of higher consciousness feeling. You only need about 5 to 10% of that in our alchemy for it to make sense. And yeah, I'll continue. My personal difficulty with the concept of oneness is used in the New Age. So it's a New Age text that criticizes New Age, which is interesting, has to do with a lack of boundaries. So I'm kind of into this. A lack of accountability and personal responsibility. It is also a nesting place, ironically, for some of the darkest shadow material of humanity. Those who leapfrog into the idea of oneness enter a tenuous path if they conclude that at a higher level of being we're all one and there's no differentiation. So this is kind of like talking about spiritual bypassing, which is kind of like why I was interested in this text. It's like, oh, it's a little bit like more gritty than other texts. My reason for saying this has to do with the edges of vibrational states. The idea of oneness is being used as a hypnotic vehicle by some people to sidestep the complexity of existence. So when this came in, I was like, oh, I'm really digging this now. It's like listening to Sun Ra or something. Like I felt the earth, I felt like the funk. Some of these people believe that if we are all one, there is no need to do anything, and in my belief, this is a sad error. Personal evolution rarely occurs as a spontaneous event, but more often through application of heart and mind, and at times through sheer effort and personal will. Heart and mind, again, so you notice dissociation, the body isn't there, the guts isn't there, right? So it's a bit of like taking off now. Another aspect of oneness that disturbs me is that some, though not all, use it as a pretext for irresponsibility and accountability. Yeah, 100%. When one enters the authentic experience of interconnectedness, the heart can expand to include all levels of existence, and one can indeed experience an emotion of profound love that embraces all opposites, and one might describe these feelings as oneness. So I'm just going to say, like, something we have to, I think, really take is that when I read texts like this, I translate heart into total nervous system. And this is actually quite true, I think, of indigenous cultures. When indigenous cultures say heart, they don't actually mean the literal middle kind of diaphragm, lungs, and heart organs. That area. They tend to mean something more connective, and they might also mean that all the nervous system. But maybe I don't know. I think Although maybe you can have this oneness feeling in your heart, but I think if you feel that in your heart, you're gonna really blow out your nervous system quite easily. It's much better to feel that oneness feeling, most of that in your belly, and keep the heart and mind a little bit clearer of that. Or like, 70, 20, 10 is kind of how I think about 70 in the belly, 20 in the heart, and 10 in the mind. And of course that switches, but it's kind of like where you keep resetting towards is to that 70, 20, 10. So, but this is quite different than the idea of oneness. The idea of oneness is not an authentic spiritual experience. It is just an idea, but is an idea that's fraught with difficulties for those seeking true, authentic spiritual realization. I said earlier, one of the difficulties with oneness was that it disregarded vibrational edges. what I mean by this is that every vibrational state has a boundary. I'm kind of really liking this because I have a tendency to get really watery between people, um, or even airy. I actually get airy, not watery. So it's a little bit mind fusion, in that there's this vibrational boundary. Like I kind of dig that. I kind of dig the threshold. Naming the threshold kind of like actually is really nice for me. In certain states of consciousness, all boundaries are transcended, but one cannot operate in the manifest universe without boundaries. Yeah, kind of like great. I dig it. Um, and when I think about this, it's like, so yeah, this is one of the difficulties with for me was just like this new age text that I'm like, I have a real repulsion to it because my mom was really into this shit, and it was really fucking weird for me as a kid. But now more realizing I am my mother's child. And now in welcoming all things, I kind of, like when we think about, the QAnon and, people into reptilians and 5D and shit, like there's a part of that that's all like valid. Not maybe literally, but, like talking about reptile mind, the reptilian brain, fight flight responses, and then also like fifth dimension. Yeah, sure. Like, I listen to spiritual jazz, I'm all right with that. So there's something about welcoming all things um, that I've been leaning into. And to be honest, though, like I felt like when I was reading this, I was like, I've never done coke in my life, but it felt like I'm snorting coke or something, like mimetic coke. It's like so much assault of like high key like memes, ideas, alternate dimensions and things like that. Really raise higher states of consciousness that actually does bring your energy really vibrationally into your mind space, and it does feel like um it did feel like getting on a high and my throbbing, and like I'm like, whoa. So I can definitely see like, like wow, like the like text and transmission is actually quite powerful. And I'm actually in a place of like, I've always, and I've been very skeptical of new age culture, but also at the same time I'm kind of like, there is a lot of truth here. um there is a lot of truth. It's actually what is more, whether it's okay, so one, I think there's a lot of substrates, and like kind of like it's like the drugs are dirty or something like that. There's like a lot of filtration through whiteness and things like that that make the transmission kind of like gunky. So that's a thing. So you're snorting that and getting high, like you're gonna feel things, right? um but and the other thing is just like, with all this talking about ascension, it's just like, if that's all you're doing is getting high and ascending, and you don't have an alchemical process that brings you back down and cycles you through this grounding and integration process, it could really rough on you. So it's almost like not even the what is the truth maybe about all this stuff. It's like, what is the process? What is the embodiment the transmission is suggesting, and is it complete? And I think, my obvious answer there, it's not. You need a lot more other things to be in the world, and you got to shake your booty and stuff. Like you got to cycle this shit through your body. It's not, this cannot be the only stuff you take in. But also I was kind of like, not taking it in maybe also is a thing, like maybe also is a thing, and you welcome all things, and that's the experiment that I've been really really enjoying. So um mhm. Yeah, so that's what I'd say about that. And yeah, this whole manuscript was pretty interesting. And then another person off of this posted something that's like, whoa, like whoa, this is another trip. Um, but let's see, it's a it's a trans it's a kind of like channeled text from Samael, Samael, which is, I guess an angel of death or something from what I'm reading, to Lilith, their lover, and it is just The author is Nathan Amthor, so Nathan, space Amthor. I mean, I guess it is fiction. He's, his Patreon is like, I'm creating fiction to amuse and inspire people, but it's also like, no, you're taking this shit pretty seriously. But it's actually like pretty awesome, the story about sex magic and how Lilith has taken Samael's dismembered penis into another dimension, and so she can pleasure herself and create through herself. It's like, okay, woo, all right, rock on, like, all right, let's do it. But there were some things really, I don't know if I can go fully into it, but well, one thing I think that was really cool in it, let me see. That Lilith was a priestess of Inanna, I think. Is that the whole right? And the priestesses were sex workers, and the temples would keep like sick people, disabled people, poor people, but then the rich people that access the sex workers of the temple, it kind of fed money down to the marginalized classes. And I mean, maybe that information is everywhere, but that's where I got it from. And I was kind of like, oh, so there's like some pretty interesting like somatic stuff happening in there, because this idea of when you take it into a cultural somatic context, so you're thinking like, oh, so this sex work thing pumps chi and energy and blood back from the brain, the head, back down into the more marginalized regions of the body that are lower. And this is done through this erotic labor. I find that pretty inspiring, because I'm like, oh, right. So like, because when you think about like, how do we deal with the world as it is today, and we're in the collective bodies in the state of a Kundalini syndrome, essentially, like with so much energy just stuck in the mind, right? And our society reflects that, all this energy resource stuck in our, at the top levels of government and other controlling powers. Like the more high you go, the more stuck things get, and the more resources are trapped. And so, how do you recirculate that? And this idea that there's this erotic alchemy that brings back down the energy, down the channel, down the, brings the cranial sacral fluid back down, brings the lymphs back down and through the thighs and like pelvis and belly and legs and stuff. That being inherently an erotic labor that's needed is kind of like was very, very cool to me. That I got from the image of that, because I've been wondering like, how do you actually do that? And it's like, it's eros. It's like, yeah, like erotic labor, erotic work is that. And you do see that in like kind of modern sex work. It's quite expensive to hire a sex worker, and it's like accessible to rich folks, but that it does like this energy transfer in the system, and something about making that more conscious, more aware in the rest of the system, the rest of the economic system, so we can have less stigma, more open eyes about it. I find that really interesting and exciting to think about. Um, yeah, so that's something that I've been sitting with, and that's also maybe part of the spell of like why, um, like like there's been a lot more erotic energy in my work, and just talking about memes and ideas and the transfer of ideas between people as an erotic experience that might even manifest sexually. um that's why you have to pay attention to like when memes are when memes are traveling, like it can really trigger sexual trauma, even how it travels. So like even uh to be a famous person known for a certain type of work, it triggers people's sexual traumas, attachment wounds deeply. And we really need to be more watchful of how we steward ideas. Um, so that's something I've been thinking a lot more about, and managing that erotic flow of energy in uh, not just consensual way, in a way that is about containment. So this actually is not my thought. I can't share who, but it was in a course somebody spoke of, because I just need to keep it private. But they, like a student of ours, kind of talked about, yes, in the material realm, there's consent. I do this, I do that, I do that, da, 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 da. But then there is this mimetic realm where um, you don't get to quite know what's going to happen. Like you don't get to know when you, let's say, set out on the dance floor, right? You don't know you're going to have a Kundalini experience later that night. Nobody ever told you. So you couldn't consent to that. I think a lot of our experience is like that. But when it involves like the body, ancestors, and spiritual forces, it's not just about consent, but it's more leans over to um, titration, containment, and management. And I thought that was like really wise. I was like, wow, that's really wise to like, right. There's the consent piece of like, do you get to touch this? Do you get to do this? Which really governs kind of maybe the non-quantum Newtonian aspects of our life, but then the quantum parts of the life that spontaneously you can have a Kundalini effect. You went out to the disco club, and I'm sure this happened in the 70s a ton. People are going out to the disco and they're like having a good time, and the DJ and the bouncer never told them, you know, um, that you're gonna have some Kundalini experience when you get out home that night, and your body's trembling and you're crying and you're sobbing, and it's like you didn't bargain for it in a way, if that makes sense. Like you didn't know that was going to happen. But you stepped on the dance floor, and that was the effect of that. And there's no way that consent can take care of all that from happening. Um, and so what we learned there is a skill of management, of containment, titration, and stuff. And I was like, oh, that's a very cool frame. Ways to really, really kind of structurally different, like kind of like give it a little sharpness. Like this thing you manage through consent, and this thing you're more managing through titration and other skills. Like that's super cool. Um, and yeah, the piece around uh, so yeah, the dance floor, disco dance, Kundalini thing. That's fucking real. What would I riff on that about? Like, yeah, I've been just thinking about like how is healing really safe? And consent, right? Versus initiation. So consent is kind of like you're having this experience. Can you consent to it? Yes, da da da. But the initiation is always about things you might not ever know, especially in a culture of people who are not initiated. The initiations happen without our kind of knowing that they're going to happen, and life brings them on, right? So like, what am I saying here? Like, is like one day maybe you have a migraine, you try to decide to test out acupuncture. So nobody in the acupuncture office is going to tell you when you go casually for acupuncture for a migraine and you never really thought about spiritual things or anything like that. 5 years down the road, you might have an acupuncture session for something, and through that time you've been deepening your relationship with your energetic system, that you might have a spontaneous spiritual experience that's like shattering and changes your life forever in like this very profound way, but also very messy. It can explode your relationships. It can explode your work life. It might even cause you some serious harm or hurt if you have a hard time coming down from the experience. A lot of us go through that, right? We go through spiritual experiences that we have a hard time. Like I've had chronic fatigue and vertigo for 2.5 years, and I had a good year and a half where I couldn't even feel my belly. I tried to breathe in it and get a migraine, and I had to deal with learning to stabilize my nervous system without the one tool that I'm really, really leaning into, right? And um, so now realizing, So yeah, anyways, yeah, so that's like kind of like the disco dance thing. It's like people treat disco dancing as like this awesome thing that you do, but the reality is, I love disco, like, but the reality is also there's a lot of coke, there's a lot of drugs, a lot of ceremonial medicines, you know what I mean? Strong ceremonial medicines being used a lot. And that inevitably, like in later eras results in a drop from that state, a drop from that state of bliss. And that took people's lives. That harmed people. And so, yeah, it's this amazing liberatory thing. And yet the freedom of the body is not totally free of risk. And I think we really need to reconsider the idea of trauma safety from this place. Not that we make things unsafe, but we want to like move away maybe a little bit, or like start take the wrapping off of trauma safety, because I was talking to a friend, and they I don't know if I have their license to mention them, but they're a black person, a black woman, and they're saying like, like white people's baselines shouldn't be the baseline for healing. And this is part of it. It's like when you use tools that are from like communities, oppressed communities surviving. And when I say white here, I don't mean white people and like this most, I mean that in the widest definition of the word. Like I'm a white person, right? It's like our nervous system comfort shouldn't be the baseline of what healing is. And I'm like, yeah, hell yeah. And also when you're engaging in activities that expand us more than that, it's inherently risky. It's inherently risky to go to the club and dance to like hip hop. It actually is, because you don't know what's going to happen 10 years down the road. And I'm that person, you know what I mean? I'm end up in like these seriously debilitating spiritual states because one night I decided to go to a nightclub and 20 years ago and listen to jazz music, jazzy house music, and dance with a bunch of people. This is where I am now, right? Um, so in a culture that doesn't have initiation, it's hard to consent to initiation because nobody told you it's going to happen. It's not a structured thing. It happens. You have to be able to meet it. And you have to know that's what's happening, and have a lot of humor, sense of humor around. Oh my God, I'm getting initiated. Ha ha ha. Or else we're going to think each other are the enemy, right? When that's happening, because we sometimes are the catalysts for each other's initiation. Same thing with heart breathing for me. It's like when I realize when I teach heart breathing to people, which is breathing into your belly, like that can trigger a sort of initiation process, or it's a part of the person's really stepping into initiation process. And um, I think I'm in a process of initiation myself through a bunch of things, um, which has included like kind of the energetic justice, Kelly Germain stuff. Um, like, and blessings to them. Thank you for putting me on this path. Blessings to you. I hope you find what you need, and you know, yeah, I love you. But yeah, blessing. Hold on, let's see. Yeah, blessing to the goddess there. I know you're angry, but I bless you. I hope you're well. Hope you be well. And that doesn't mean I'm not annoyed, but it's also like I love you. It's very simple. But what was I talking about? Hmm. Hold on one second. My nose is like a little bit runny from the whiskey. Yeah, I'm back, and yeah, initiation. When we don't have a culture of initiation, I guess we don't really get to consent to when it happens, or at least be forewarned. But I think for me now, my sense is to actually take a little bit more time, um, and realize the responsibility of initiating people. And part of, I think, what I've been experiencing as hardship in my last 3 years is actually the effects of triggering people's initiation processes, but not really being clear with them that's going to happen. Um, and so I'm in a period of taking responsibility for that, kind of contracting my business actually a bit, not doubling down on if I'm shown like I need to work on things, I don't want to double down and expand. I actually want to contract and become smaller and become more intimate. Um, so yeah, that's a lot of the process that's going on for me right now. And oh, interesting. I see like little mushroom people and forest gnomes kind of all around me. And I noticed today I'm a little bit talking fast. Some exciting, fun stuff happened for me today for the first time in a week or something. So, yeah, and then crystals, mushrooms, and gnomes. There's a feeling of soft, bubbly feeling in my body that's very subtle, but there's a goodness to it. Oh, yeah, the gnomes are dancing now. And the gnome went into the base of my skull and is like crawling into the back of my mind. I feel like a light bubbling feeling in the base of a little bit inside from the base of my skull. And then there's like a subtle ripple traveling down my vagus nerve spine into my sacrum, and then like channeling into my jewels. Yeah, and sensation coming back online through my jewels and shaft. I'm just gonna say it. Interesting, and I get a whole vision of an ecosystem in my jewels or my genitals. Let's just use the non-fragile words, right? And I can feel it's interesting because we talked about earlier about Lilith having Samael's kind of impaled, kind of dismembered penis, and there's a feeling lately of me in becoming smaller and not actually doing like being so much of a beacon. It's actually brought my it feels like part of my body's remembering itself. Like for a long time, like I remember 4 years ago I had some pretty nasty experiences with like PTSD type experiences where like everything became very scary, and like I just felt this kind of like black hole in my groin. Like I didn't have sensation, didn't have awareness, and there's something about that coming back online, and it's just really, like beautifully unthreatening. um I think even the images in you know European art around nymphs and satyrs, like the satyr with the animal body in the lower half, and it's kind of very rambunctious. There's a lot of tales of satyrs, you know, raping nymphs, and even there, it's already dissociated in a way. It's starting this dissociation feeling, and I can feel my body working a little bit past that period into something that's a lot more like, oh, I'm not that animals are bad, but just like the idea of the lower body of a man being animal and being rapey and doing all these things. I'm like, oh, but I'm also not tuning into something that's different. It's actually like having this. It's interesting having this genital sensation and feeling flow in there, warmth, that I don't feel any of that kind of out of controlness or everything that you're told about this is about, it's like it's going to make you unsafe, it's going to make you dangerous, but it's actually like really reassociating for me as a man. And it's this contradiction of safety and masculinity. It's like you say stop being a dick, but actually the thing is, the thing that is actually troubling about masculinity is its dissociation from the dick. So such a contradiction we were caught in, because when we dissociate from our pelvis becomes possessed and takes on these malevolent characteristics of, you know, phallousness, and I can feel a lot of that healing around me for sure right now, even this moment, since like even just reporting. I think this is like the third podcast in a row that I've talked about my testicles. But it feels like very, and my shaft too. It's like, okay, but it feels like very kind and humbling. um I also want to say, like, this is a weird thing to mention on recording, but um I was talking to a friend who was helping me out, and they kind of had the advice of like, Tada, you need to like just maybe dedicate your genitals to the goddess, and like, my sex is for you, like, let that be your partner. And so I can feel the real medicine of that right in this moment of having done that, and just reporting that. I guess I caught on tape now is that, like, I commit my erotic energy to, you know to the goddess. And I mean that in the widest definition of the word, but I think there's like something around, like, I've been doing this horror work, but haven't, when it comes to understanding, the moon cycles. um it's not just about understanding the oppression that women go through. It's more like, it's that too, but it's about like actually being able to share information about the energetic cycles people who have wombs go through, and that being a part of my basic knowledge. I think there's a part of me not being initiated, is me not actually understanding those things and know how to work with them. And possibly because even in our own families, our mothers are not allowed to go through that process, or them going through that mooning process is seen as malevolence, or causes disarray, like puts things into chaos and stuff. So I'm really feeling all that. So that's me in my practice right now. um, Dedicating my erotic practice to the goddess. And even on this podcast, that's what I mean. It's like, it's not sexual, but it is erotic, and it's an erotic mimetic process. Like, I'm sharing memes, and to receive that is erotic, and to give that is erotic, and to bring memes out of the collective unconscious and speak them through is also erotic process. And dedicating all that to goddess feels really good. And I'm really glad I'm in this right now. So, toast. Yep. And all things are welcome. All things are welcome. That's really what I hope the podcast and the community space is going to be like, where all things are welcome, at the right dosage, you know what I mean? But sometimes you have to do a kind of mimetic line of coke, which is like reading a new age channeling of Lilith by some white guy. What do you do with that? But I think that's kind of like, that's the new attitude, and I'm really grateful for some. I don't know if I had the consent to name them, so I'm just gonna hold them. But a few people who really helped me on the last little while, becoming more into like this everything is welcome place, because I could be a pretty repressed person. So yeah. So hold on, I'm gonna tune into, is this where I'm ending here tonight? Oh, I think one thing I'll report is I told somebody today I love them, and it was completely inappropriate to what's been happening between me and this person. Inappropriate not in the sense like it's not like inappropriate like I did it like a gross thing, but in a like kind of like a little bit out of the blue. Sideways or poop appears. And saying that without any kind of big attachment, longing, expectation, or even what that would mean. Does that mean that's sexual? Does that mean that is romantic? Does it mean it's even platonic? None of that is defined actually when I said that. I can really feel the gift of goddess in that. This is the first time I feel like, whoa, I did that? And it was a big I love you. It wasn't like a small one or anything in it. But it didn't have to be erotic. It didn't have to be sexual. It doesn't have to be platonic. It doesn't have to be romantic. It doesn't have to be physical. It doesn't have to be ethereal. Like it's actually in this unknown whatever. It's just the thing that came through in the moment. Yeah, so having said that, I would love to put out that I love you again. And this feels like weird love guru, but like I'm just gonna put that out there to all beings, in the widest sense of the word. And then also primarily facing goddess, mean like to all ancestors, to all descendants, I love you. Interesting. There's heart softening. Belly is very sure, steady, heart softening. Head still like very stubborn and like kind of crunchy. This is where I am. Thank you.